Hello everyone, and welcome to episode number 3 of the Pregnant Hag podcast. I have a very special guest here on the show with me today. I'm going to be in a dialogue with Valarie Budayr, and let me just read out her bio to you to introduce her. So, Valarie Budayr is the founder of Mongata Inner Healing Center, as well as an award-winning author, publisher, and composer. She's an impassioned teacher, holistic coach, and also a sound therapist, guiding others towards self-discovery and self-healing through the principles of sound, myth, connection with nature, inner traditions, depth psychology, and wisdom practices. Valarie was born in the US, but she firmly embraces her ancestral heritage of the island of Gotland, that's in the Baltic Sea, part of Sweden. She is a knowing woman, a Kunniga or tiatea, and a practitioner in both Northern European and North Karelian traditions. She works closely with the Norns and the Seidr traditions, as well as incorporating the North Karelian traditions and culture into her sound healing sessions and rituals. With over 31 years of teaching experience, Valarie invites her students and her clients into immersive explorations of the self. Her mission is to share the beauty and wonder of the world, inspiring and empowering people into their best and fullest self. Now, I hope I didn't leave anything out, Valarie.
No, not at all.
Let's get right to it. I think what is central in your work is the Kalavala. Now, not everyone listening to this podcast is even going to know what that is. So I think we need a bit of an introduction on that. Would you please tell us what is the Kalavala, please?
Yeah. So the Kalevala is the epic story poem of the country of Finland. And this was collected by a physician, Elias Lönnrot, in the 19th century. So it really isn't a linear tradition per se. But he went around as a country doctor collecting all these rune songs and put them into this collection called the Kalavala. The Kalevala is about really some amazing characters, but one in particular is Väinämöinen, who is this amazing sound shaman. You know, his just singing, he can bring people to their knees, put them in prison, collapse their lives, create their lives. So he's the sound shaman that can bring order from chaos. He can also create a lot of chaos as well. So when we talk about the Kalevala and sound traditions, we're talking about Väinämöinen specifically. And then secondarily, the tradition of the Conte, a magic harp, and the rune songs that once Elias Lönnrot compiled the Kalevala, that Finnish people, especially Karelians, North Karelians, and even way down into Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, sang from memory. So that is that's the story of the Kalevala and the tradition of rune singing.
Yes. Now, again, for the audience, because I think I know, but 2 questions about that. Would you explain exactly what part of Finland Karelia is, and if maybe some of that stretches into Russia today? And also, would you explain how the word rune is used in the context of the Kalevala?
Okay, perfect. Okay, so Karelia is the eastern part of Finland, and there's several sectors of Karelia. You have, it's kind of mid-east of Finland, and then you have a northeast part of Finland. But during all the 20th century turmoil with Russia coming in, Karelia was divided into 2. So there's a large part of Karelia that still exists today in the Russian borders. And then within Finland, Karelia, as we know it as a tradition and a people, though it exists, especially Vienna Karelia, its traditions and cultures have really been decimated by war. And that's one of the reasons it's so important to keep some of these traditions going, whether we're in Finland or out of Finland. The idea of a rune song, runo is the plural of that, Ruin in our Nordic tradition meaning something that is secret or hidden, and having to go into the interior to find inside ourselves to find secret meaning. In the Finnish tradition, a little bit of that has been, transferred over, but it's really a 5-note song sung in a tetrametric meter. So it's a 4-beat meter with 5 notes. And that's how the structure is set up in the Kalavala.
Okay.
It's a sung tradition. Sound tradition.
And is it possible to give us an example of that, or is that too much off the cuff? Could you, give us?
Yeah, I do. So what I'm going to do is sing the opening for us to the Kalevala, and then I'll show you the Kantele, so we won't mix them. So the opening of the Kalevala goes something like this. Nilieni me tunte kevi, aivoni ayatalevi, late ani laulaman, sani atsaniliman, suku virte sultaman, late virti laulaman, suku virti sultaman, late virti laulaman. And so that's the opening of the Kalevala, meaning I am driven to my longing to tell the understanding urges of my people and to tell their stories and their history through the Kalevala and the legends and the ballads of the nation being Suomi, Finland, right? So then that's usually, so you can sing it, and a singer usually just sings the songs, and sitting next to them is a kantele player. And so this is the kantele, and it's a 5-stringed harp or zither, and so the melody that I just played sounds like this. I hope we can hear it. Let me know. I have a mic set up if it's too loud or what.
That's beautiful. I can hear that just fine, so I hope our audience can as well. There were a few little disturbances to the sound earlier, so I hope we're going to be okay for the sound.
Okay.
Fine right now.
Well, it's Zoom. We're all used to Zoom world and Zoom sound by now. But the really interesting thing about the kantele is everything in the Kalevala comes from a magical source. So the kantele is also magical. It was a Wainamoinen called this ginormous pike out of the sea. And after feeding everybody around him this amazing feast of a dinner, he didn't want the pike bones to go to waste. So he took the jawbone of the pike, he took the tail hairs of a crazy horse, a demon-possessed horse called a hissi, and then he took the pike teeth for the keys in the kantele, and he strung this harp. So in the Kalevala, Runo 40 just talks about the construction of the kantele. When we get to Runo 41, it talks about the magic that was made. So Wainamoinen asked everybody around him, is there anybody that can show me how to play this harp? And one person tried, and another person tried, and nobody could really play it. So Wainamoinen took it, and when he played it, the most staunch, strongest of men and people would cry. They would just weep at the beauty of his playing. And their tears would run into the ground, run into the source water, and when they hit the sea, became pearls. And so, this is again the magical origins. Well, Wainamoinen liked to battle, and not with weapons. His weapons was his sound, his voice, his instruments. He was an amazing magician, shaman type. And so he ended up destroying the first Kalavala, or the first Kantele. And the second one was made out of a birch tree. And the strings were the hair of a beautiful maiden. And the pegs were made of wood from the birch tree. And it made people cry when he played, just like the first one. And this is the gift. When he left the Kalevala, when Wainamoinen left the story cycle, he left the Kantele behind for each one of us to find our own inner magic and to create our own worlds that we envision.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also a strong message about the way that sound actually creates the reality that we all live in. And another thing I find so interesting as a Seidr and Old Norse tradition teacher is in just what you tell us right now, we're also like hearing some possible links to, I think, the poetic Eddas, because of course the Old Norse had an oral tradition as well. And I think it's understood that these great song cycles or poems, were, sung quite possibly, at least like poetry, but quite possibly they were sung. And just in what you say, like I'm hearing some connections to the runes as we use them in the Northern tradition, like meaning, like the script of the elder Futhark, but every letter also being a symbol in its own right. Do you have any observations to make about where the two, because, Finland and Sweden, they are neighbors, they're neighboring countries, but still, the languages are in a different like branch of the language tree. So it's Finnish being a Finno-Ugric language and, Swedish being a Scandinavian language. But of course, them being so close, you have correspondences as well. So as someone who studies both traditions, do you have anything to say about that?
I do. Actually, I do. So, we don't develop our cultures and our traditions in a vacuum. And when we come from oral traditions, which the Kalevala was before Elias Lönnrot wrote it down. And when we talk about the Eddas and sagas, those are oral traditions. So our brains are wired differently when we're doing oral traditions, as opposed to when we're doing a literary verbal reading tradition. And the differences are when we are from an oral tradition, we have this context related, interrelated context, meaning we're related to the land. We're related person to person in relationship to the person telling us the story. And then we have the knowledge base itself. So when we take our literary mind and we want to read it and we want to memorize it, it becomes very difficult. Because in these oral tradition societies, we have absolute recall. And so we have this memory, we have this communal, collective memory that is passed from person to person, and it's from being deeply grounded in the traditions. And so the Nordic tradition also existed in Finland, and it sat side by side to the predecessor of that tradition called the Tietaja tradition. Then came the Nordic tradition, and then our rune singing traditions are exceptionally ancient. They have their roots in Tietaja culture as well. But then it's the 19th century that it became written down. And so we actually have the best of both worlds when we're talking about the Kalevala, because we have our communal memory of oral tradition that was still prized. The people that I studied with were the last rune singers. So that memory, that oral tradition, and it was going 5 or 6 generations in their family to be able to recite the entire Kalevala or sing it by heart. And so we have the best of both worlds with the Kalevala. We have our oral memory, which is different. And then we have our literary memory, which is captured. And everybody thinks that if we're from an oral tradition, that we have no way of remembering it. Actually, the memory access is greater than if we have just a literary society. And so the Kalevala is the best of both worlds.
That's beautifully said. Also, you have used the word tiatea a few times. Would you mind explaining what that is? I think it's something to do with the Finnish word for knowing or for seeing. So I think it's someone who's in the know, but you probably explain it better than I do.
Right. So a tiatea is generally a woman who knows. There are, of course, men who practice this tradition, but they would dress like women, and they weren't considered men. So a tiatea is one who knows. And it's not that they go around with this encyclopedic memory. It's that they have tools and skill set to go into unseen realms and worlds. They are a bridge. It is a shamanic tradition between this seen world and any unseen world that might exist. They know how to go and journey and get the knowledge they're needing. They know how to read signs and symbols. And then it's also a song tradition. So any of the countries in the Baltic Sea are called the song lands. And they're magic traditions. And I'm saying that magic, not as in David Copperfield magic show. I'm saying that magic in the way of healing capabilities and learning inner knowing. So the magic traditions of the Baltic states, the Baltic countries, the Baltic region, including Gotland, is through song and family song rituals that then you grow up and you end up studying with teachers and expanding that knowledge. So a tiatea is someone that knows all the subspecialties of magic. And that can be anything from forecasting what the weather's going to be in the farming cycle, what diseases are coming, what any enemies that might be coming, as well as inner healing, inner knowing, and bringing balance to chaos, basically. Yeah. And so there's in the song lands and in the tiatea traditions, there are many subspecialties. Like there are people who do nothing but sing grieving songs. They're lamenters. And it's so everybody can grieve as a commune, as a community, and honor the person who has transitioned forward. There are sauna specialists that do nothing but sauna ritual, from healing the sick in the sauna, delivering babies, doing bridal showers, which literally right. The sauna is a big hub in all of the northern regions. And then there's family rituals, which you learn at the side of your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, and they notice you like to sing and they ask you into those traditions. So a tiatea is somebody that knows all of the rituals. And, and remember, rituals are formed not in a vacuum either. They're formed in a community. And so this is somebody who is greatly connected to her community and understands the nature of the practice of being in a relationship to everything and seeing the interrelationships and can communicate with them. Yeah. So that's what a tiatea is. That was a long explanation.
A long definition, but thank you for making that clear. Because I think, if people don't know the meanings of these beautiful words, it can be hard for people to penetrate what we're talking about here. So I have one other question for you, because I think, for both of us, at the heart of our work is research, teaching. We both write books, we're both passionate about, all traditional material, working in traditions alongside each other that, as you say, overlap and have common ground. So, I know the answer to this question, but I think it's an important one to ask. Why is it so important to get all of that old, which is also new and modern at the same time, material down? Some people might say, oh, isn't it material for the past? Does it even have relevance for an age in which the internet reigns supreme, etc., etc.? Now, I know on which side you and I come down, because we're both passionate about teaching young people as well. But, could you speak to that for a moment, like a writer, a publisher, and a musician, the importance of getting it down for our descendants?
Right. So it's a lineage keeper. It's a legacy. And I think, especially in the 20th, 21st century, people can feel like they can read a book and get it, which they can partially. But the act of being a teacher and teaching others these traditions is really that interconnectedness of keeping a tradition alive. So that really became apparent for me when you asked me to do the presentation on the Kalavala in our first advanced Seidr group work. And it just jogged this memory in me, like all of the old rune singers are gone. And how do we move this forward? And, you know, like you see, used to tell me, if you're singing runes, you're the rune singer. There's no last anything. But then as I've done my research, I've realized that there were so many traditions that have been captured, but weren't in the Kalavala, but are related to the Kalavala. The other thing that I realized coming back to it after many decades being away from it, and also being a practicing shaman, is that it is a shamanic tradition. And, you know, to keep those traditions alive. And we are taught so much in a separate framework, like I learn this information and then I do this and then I can teach this, but it has nothing about being connected to one another. So if you have a piece of land that you're connected to, if you have a knowledge system that you're connected to and a person to learn it from, you immediately can call back that memory in seconds. And even if there's a little detail I'm missing, I can sit here and go, Imelda, and I can even call out the moment, and then the whole information keeps coming back. So these are our ancient traditions. It's much more than just rote memory and rote knowledge. It's the practice of traditions, and it used to take millennia, hundreds of years, 1,000 years for things to change within communities. Now we have this internet, which works in nanoseconds, and it's finding that balance of how to keep these interactive, interrelated oral traditions alive in the technological world. And so for me, this is why it's important to use what we have to move forward, but to keep the practices alive and not in a vacuum. No. So, realizing now that the Kalavala is really a shamanic text, putting that into shamanic practice.
Yeah, exactly. Like the poetic Edda and the prose Edda are also shamanic texts, and there is so much in there you can actually put into practice when you have the abilities of the tiatea and you know how to do that. And like what I have found bringing people home to the land in Sweden, and you are part of the group there, because refer to our Seidr group, is that the way people have expressed it is that now I can hear the ancestors sing in my blood again. So they're referring to something that's not only coming from the outside, like they're having a lesson and learning something. They're connecting to something that's in their lineage, something that sings in their blood. And I think that's what's so powerful about this. It's like connecting people back up to that, like, ancestral wisdom, and the ancestral wisdom teaching.
Ancestral wisdom, exactly. And kinship, ancestral teaching, because in our 21st century, we look at relationships between people. But in our ancient wisdom traditions, we have relationships with trees and with dirt and with insects and with animals and with birds and with water. And we communicate with everything. And so if a body of water is sick, I need to speak with that body of water, but I also need to speak with everything that's around that body of water to figure out what's happened. And so these are the important ways of lineage keeping, that we have a relationship with everything. We are talking to everything, and nothing's isolated in a vacuum with one thing, right?
No, but also everything is talking to us, because in these traditions you would also say, like, don't anger the mountain, for instance, which makes no sense in contemporary English. What do you mean making the mountain angry? But then also if you hear some stories of what happens to mountaineers who go up mountains without requesting permission and actually having a dialogue with the mountain about, is it actually okay to climb it? I think we've all heard those stories. So I actually, as someone who works from that connection to the land and all that is, I absolutely believe that you can anger a mountain, or you can anger a sea or a river and cook up an almighty storm that way. And if you do that, there are going to be the consequences of that for both you and your community.
Right.
This is another thing I want to fit in, because I have too many students who very well-meaningly, because they're very passionate and it's wonderful, but they come to my courses with this idea that like everything in nature is going to be cute, kind of like, oh, I can connect to a storm and I'm going to have an interesting journey, or like I'm going to go to the ocean and I'm going to have only beautiful sort of, experiences of serenity. Well, actually connecting to any and all of those things is also going to give us, there's going to be a real danger in that as well as a gift. And if we're going to be connecting with these incredibly powerful beings, and let's face it, they were around before you and I called the earth. Like, we need to realize just how formidable they are, and also the powers that they hold. I think now the connection is breaking for a moment. I hope you come back up. Hello?
Okay, there you are. You froze there for a second. Here we are. We're back.
It's just the internet is unstable, but it's actually at 4 bars, so I can't see what's going on.
It's okay. So did you ask a question in that last bit?
No, it wasn't a question. I think I was still talking about how, yes, we need to be in communication with all of these different forces in the landscape and with all of these beings, but also from a place of deep respect. And I just wanted to tell this idea that all of these beings are really cute and just waiting to hear from
No.
Some of these beings are like, they're downright dangerous, or they're very, very powerful. And we have to tread with immense care and make offerings and, all of those things.
And asking, may I approach you? May I speak with you? And you get no. And if you push no, they're going to push back. And so another way, how may I approach you? How can we have a conversation? They may or may not let you know. Especially in Nordic tradition, I really clarify for people, this is not Love and Light. This is not Marvel Comics. There's some really dicey moments. And but my life is richer for them. I learned a lot about myself in them.
Yeah, and also I think we learn a lot about the true nature of the universe. To just think that everything in the universe is like benign, it's very comfortable to think that it's not borne out by the experiences you have on the land.
If something is in order now, it's the nature of our universe. It must return to chaos. So be thankful for the order you're feeling now, because it could be seconds away from turning into chaos. We have seen that with coronavirus, and as a global community, we have experienced this on a global level. And I don't think, since a meteor hit the globe, have we experienced something altogether now. So we have been in great chaos. And there are still signs of that chaos all around, trying to go back into order. But it's the law of the universe. Order goes to chaos and goes back to order again.
Yes, it's like a dialectic process of swinging between, entropy and a greater state of order. And I'm sure there are all sorts of laws in physics. Like the law of thermodynamics and stuff like that. But I think another point to make here is that there is also such a thing. It's only through understanding the true nature of the universe and all of these multitudes of beings around us that we can understand our own nature as human beings. So it's also a matter of like always doing that work and looking in every mirror that is held up, no matter how unflattering that mirror is going to be. And I think collectively we're facing a very unflattering mirror right now. The pandemic has not flattered us in any way, but yet, the only way is through it and really endlessly looking at these mirrors that are being held up.
Right. And really understanding that any mirror that's reflecting back to you is not separate from you.
No.
You're part of the same mirror. You're part of the same consciousness. You're part of the same scene. And so that's when you have to learn to understand what you're seeing the reflection of.
Yeah, but that even goes for other human beings. I've taught that on many courses. You know, I have taught, you know, the concept of the wall of mirrors. And I've asked people, like, all present in one room, to really look at all other human beings in that room and sort of for a moment just accept that as that, you know, everyone is like a part of me and holds up a mirror for me. And that can be quite sort of hard to do, especially in modern times. We tend to live in bubbles, you know, on Facebook, we unfriend, we unfollow, we set our preferences for whom we want to appear in our feed. So I think we're living in an extremified bubble culture. And to my mind, there are enormous risks in that, because often our greatest learning is done when we are with or communicating with, spending time with people who do not think the way we do and do not hold the same opinions as we do.
No, exactly. And the more people that you can engage with that are different from you, the wider the field becomes for you to pull learning from about yourself, about yourself. So engage with as much difference as possible.
Yeah, no, I'm very much for that. So is there any teaching in the Kalevala around shadow work, just out of interest?
I think, you know, they're not head on about it, but yeah, there's a lot of shadow work in the Kalevala. You know, Ilmarinen was cast into, you know, a billion different pieces, and his mother came and sang him back together, but he was never the same person again. And, you know, the real harm of being shattered, right? And she just, so her shadow is she's grieving for her son, looking for her son, and then sees him in a gadillion pieces and said, I'm going to fix this, right? But, and so she sang songs to put him together, but she neither put herself back together inside, and you can't, he would have to put his own nervous system and soul back together. Somebody, you have to chew your own food. You can't do it. That's shadow work, chewing your own food. So, you know, so that's one instance that I think of, this whole idea of finding Payola, you know, this whole mysterious object that can bring, you know, everlasting pleasure and eternity and all of this. It's, you know, really the hero's journey, which has a lot of shadow work in it. Also, there's just so many different ways of transitioning. I don't use the word dying because really in the Kalevala, they may not be a character anymore. They may die in the story, but then you'll find them as something else, like a bird. They've transitioned into a bird. They died in one story, and now they're a bird. Yeah, they shapeshift, but they left their human container. Yeah. So, you know, signs and symbols and communication. So, as the Kalevala goes on, you know, all the characters and their stories do have to face their shadow side. And it really comes down to, are they owning it? And I don't see a lot of ownership. You know, like if you know, Vainamoinen destroys something, he'll tell you why they deserved it and how now he's, you know, the winner, the hero. So that's narcissism, basically. So yeah, so the shadow is there. And I think that's part of bringing it into or back to a shamanic tradition and saying, okay, when we see this, this is our shadow. And this is maybe we want to do some inner child work. We want to do some deep shadow work of what's running our program. So I would use, like any myth cosmology, I would use that as the leaping off point to do shadow work.
Yes. I think like you would, but and I do too, but I always hope it becomes more of a collective practice, because I think it's something we really need to, you know, commit to, all of us. I think it's also really beautiful when you say about like Lemminkainen and how, you know, when he's like all broke and his mother sings him back together. To me, that's a very beautiful metaphor for motherhood. But tell me a little bit more. I mean, you had the privilege of studying these old Kalavala singers. You know, this was a few decades ago, as I understand it. And Conte even went up in the attic for a while, but it reappeared even in your life. So Tell us about these old Kalavala singers and tell us what is happening in Finland right now around this tradition. Is it being preserved? Are there new young Kalavala singers being trained? What is going on?
So in the 1980s, I was studying in Europe, and a notice was put on the board that they were looking for research assistants to go up to Finland. You had to, you would be the ultimate assistant if you knew music notation. You could write music notation by ear, which is great. I was a music major, I could. And if you had any knowledge at all of Swedish and or Finnish, which I had both. And so I applied and they took me. But, it was a music ethnology trip and an anthropology trip. Rule number 1, you just observe. You might ask a couple open-ended questions like, why are you singing that? But you're not to get involved. I can tell you within 72 hours of arriving in Vienna, Karelia, Finland, I ended up living with people. I just immersed myself, like I made connections because of the language. And I ended up staying with a rune singer and his family for that whole summer. And, my teachers and the people I traveled with were not happy, but in the end they were, because I got lots of information, because I basically signed up to be taught. And when you're the student, you want to make your teacher happy. So I had never been taught like that. And it would be things like chop wood, carry water. Literally, they had these wood burning stoves, cast iron stoves, and I had to get enough wood in the kitchen for the day. And my first job was to get up at 5 a.m, sing the day alive, sing to the trees and sing to the birds and sing to the lake, and then come back and get the ginormous tea kettle filled with water and on that stove lit. That was my job. That's how we started the day. And then I would work all day. We washed by hand in the 20th century. We washed clothes by hand and hung them out to dry. And, out in the fields cutting grain, whatever. We were all farmers. So we were just doing farm work. And then in the evening is when everybody would sit down and start the singing. And on the weekends, it could go all night. And if there was a wedding, it would go all weekend. Wow. And so that's what I did for 3 summers. Then, my degrees, I came back to the state, married, family, I got busy with my life. And it was just one of those things where you think, oh, that was the most amazing experience. And at that time, there were only 12 rune singers left. And, the tradition is, the whole Kalevala by heart. And you actually do the singing competition that Väinämöinen did in the Kalevala. And so they would see how many songs that they could know, 300, 400, and you're up all night, all weekend. Like it was like the Kalevala version of a rave, basically. But then, as I was getting ready to come study with you in Sweden, you had sent me, you put something up on Facebook about the Kalevala, and it triggered this whole memory response. And I responded very enthusiastically to that post. Yeah. And you asked me, can you share your enthusiasm with our Seidr circle? I said, yes. And then I'm sitting there on the plane, because I was on a plane when we were doing all this, flying home going, well, if I'm going to talk about the Kalevala, I have to find my kantele. And I had to literally clean out a closet, but I found it, the one I played today. And it was made by one of the rune singer's brothers. So it's really now very important to me. And it was this whole journey of coming back to share the joy of the Kalevala and the tradition of rune singing. And then realizing that Jussi Huovinen, who I studied with, had died as recently as 2018. So it wasn't that long ago. No. And then that was it. And I got to really, so as I was preparing for our evening event, I went back to reading the Kalevala and singing, and I found all my notebooks. So it was like meeting my 20-year-old self again, right? And how I envisioned things. But then when I went back to read the Kalevala, at this point, I'm a shaman, right? I'm reading it going, this is a shamanic text, which totally missed me at 20 years old. And, knowledge is that way. It's very spiral. You'll come back to the same thing and see it in a different way and so seeing that in a different way, then really I've really researched the rune singing tradition and have realized that that was for that time. You know, you went from an oral tradition to a literary tradition and showing people how much you could remember of the stories and the variation. We're not that kind of a culture anymore.
No.
And so within Finland, yes, there are rune singers, but few of them, and few that act the way they did in the 19th and 20th century. So the tradition is morphing. Primarily, though, even the Conte now, since 1950, has become like this concert classical instrument.
Oh, okay.
And so now you can get them with 36 strings, 42 strings.
Oh, okay.
And so it's also gone down its own way, which is fine. But the traditional Conte, which is either 5 strings or 10 strings, right? It's really about not learning music. It's about letting your soul sing what it knows, right? So then that, as I talked to Jussi, even though he's transitioned to the other side, I talked to him, and he's just saying, you know, follow your intuition and your instinct. If you're singing rune songs, you're a rune singer. Anybody that's singing a rune song is a rune singer. So the rune singing
audience, isn't it? I mean, for the people listening, like take that.
Well, and so if you look at the conservatories in Finland, people are singing specific rune songs. Yeah. But that tradition of knowing the whole Kalevala by memory is probably seen its day for this moment. Yeah. My focus is really putting it back, from taking it from the literary, because I've been researching in the Folklore Society. Their library is vast, and really putting it back into a shamanic tradition. And because it's clearly there. And when you're in the Folklore Society libraries, you can see songs for healing, songs to imprint water with for healing, sauna water. What do you sing to sauna water? You know, and just really bringing it back to its shamanic traditions. Do I know the shamanic traditions of 5,000 years ago? I do not. But I've been well trained in the shamanic traditions of the 21st century that were taken from the 20th century and the 19th century and further beyond, and creating a living tradition today based on ancient wisdom.
And the ancestors singing in your blood, as some of my students.
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of singing ancestors.
Right, you know, here the entire choir, just talking to you. But I also just wanted to say, because the presentation you did for our group was in Sweden, and we're all in my school building, which is this old traditional building. And, you know, like everyone said afterwards that we were transported. It's like we had all been in Finland, and it was even, you know, like say the furniture, the house around us shape-shifted a little. So I think it's very close to what it would look like in Finland. But we all had this sense that we had been in the, you know, the country next door. And then when your presentation ended, we all sort of kind of morphed back into the room we were in. It was a very powerful experience. And I think it
for me as
well, impression on the whole group. Yeah.
Yeah, for me as well. And that day I had gone, I have a place that I sit in your forest. And I took the kantale out and I just sang, and I called in Jussi and I called in the trees. I just practiced what I did in Finland. And then, you know, it's really important to talk about the time of year it was. The solstice, the summer solstice had just happened, and we hadn't seen night in several days. Yeah. And the day that we did that evening was the first day of dusk.
Yeah.
You know, so you go several days without dusk, and then you get dusk. And so we have the long shadows, and we had the candlelight and the old stove in your schoolhouse. And it transported us right back there.
Very much did transport us. So, you know, I'm so happy I had this brainwave of asking you to do that, because it really opened some portals for you, for me, for other people.
It opened up my life. I would not be doing all of this work if you had not asked that question. I would be a Norse shaman, but now I really have been called back to that tradition.
There you go. I shall think of myself as a sacred question asker.
Yeah, you are. That you are.
So
when I explain Imelda Almqvist, I go, she asks really potent questions. They will change your life or bring you back to your life, something. You're a great question asker.
Put down my tombstone, really. She asked great questions. She asked questions, really. Could be something worse on the tombstone. Anyway, just wanted to ask, as we're going to be bringing this wonderful dialogue to a close here on the Pregnant Hag, do you have any questions for me also? Like anything you want to ask me?
Yeah. So I know that, this immersion with me going back to the Kalavala has sparked an interest for you. Mm-hmm. And I know during COVID, you have been teaching yourself Finnish. You have to know this is no easy feat, but we both love learning languages for research purposes. Yeah. And so what insights and what sparks of inspiration has reading the Kalevala, learning Finnish to read the Kalevala in Finnish, what have you embodied from that project this year?
Well, I'm still working on it. I'm hoping to get to Sweden next week, and I want to sort of focus on it more intensely because we had a kind of crazy period here. But I think what I have really got from it is like the learning Finnish. First of all, some languages are difficult to learn. I always thought, I could learn any language easy. When people said, I can't learn language, it's too difficult. I thought, stuff and nonsense. Languages are so easy to learn. But I think in Finnish, I have met my match. I admit it's an extremely difficult.
Even more than Russian or Chinese or anything like that.
More
really.
Than Russian, I would say about the same as Mandarin Chinese. Same level of difficulty as Mandarin Chinese. And same as in Mandarin Chinese, you can study it for quite a long time and still come face to face with a text where you understand, this is the subject, and then end something. But you still need a dictionary to get a feeling for what's going on there. Never had that with any other language I studied. With far more ease, I've been able to read my way through newspapers and stuff. But then I think with the Kalavala, because you were just singing the opening stanzas, and what I love so much is how rich Finnish is. The language itself is so rich. Like, for instance, in that, in these opening lines where, the story is being sung, but if I have translated it correctly, my Finnish not being 100%, it's like that the words roll out of the mouth of the poet like either teeth or little pebbles. So the teeth become like little pebbles, and that sort of rolls into the world. But that also gives me an image of, how like when the world was created and how the glaciers swept over the Nordic countries and then withdrew and left these big boulders and things behind. So to me, there's an entire creation story there. And then another example is that a bit further, also I think it's in the second, maybe in the second, what do you call it? Not the second stanza, but a bit further down. Like the poet is like, talking to his brother as well. So he's also, like telling his brother about like ways of going somewhere and journeys and how the journeys are in the landscape. But then even the way that we in English, sorry, something coming up on my screen, that's gone. Is the way we just translate that into brother or sibling. That's not actually the word in Finnish. And I think in Finnish it's kasvi. And it means something like, if you go to the etymology of it, is like the person who is like a plant that I grew in community with. So the actual image that comes to mind, if you follow the etymology, is of that plants grow together, and they can only grow when they are together, because without each other, the plants will just topple over. That's why we give plants little sort of pieces of wood. Yeah. We trail them up. And, also how you grow roots together and then you reach for the sky together. So it's like you're growing together in a community. And, having got that far into Finnish, which is not very far at all, you think to just in English translate that into like brother or sibling. It's not the same thing at all. You can't convey all of these sort of plant-related meanings. Yeah. And then people say to me, well, Imelda, you're completely bonkers. Isn't knowing 20 languages enough? Like, why would you teach yourself Finnish? Like, you don't even live there. You don't even get to speak it. This is like a complete waste of time. No, and I try to tell them stories about, like, what is in the Kalevala. And if you understand a limited amount of Finnish like I do, you start seeing how in every word is a poem in its own right. And it's so rich in all these symbolic images. And that tell me something about the entire nature and creation of the world. And then people look at me and say, yeah, right, Imelda, that sounds like you. People don't.
No, it shows again that point of relationship, right? And that point of interconnection. And like you, I also speak a lot of languages, but I tell people this: for every language I learn, I get a new life, new foods, new music, new perspectives of looking at life, new literature, new healing songs, new plants, new, like, with every language you learn, you get a new life.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I'm your sister in that way, but
I know.
not even my soul sister, but I have conveying that to other people. And I know, like, one of the first times I was in Sweden, and I have learned Swedish, and I could speak Swedish fine, but this was like Easter time, so we're going for a walk on the clipboard, on the cliffs on the Swedish west coast. And my mother-in-law kept saying, "You are from the Netherlands. Please tell me the names of all of these plants." And of course, yeah, I've learned Swedish in a couple of weeks. Like the name of every single wild plant, and a lot of these plants don't even grow in the Netherlands. So at that point, I started struggling. I thought, I thought I had learned Swedish. I thought I was doing quite okay with Swedish, but actually there's something missing here. I still don't know all the names for all of the plants and trees that grow in Sweden. But it's
Well,
all over
and
again.
and like the plants that grow on Gotland, or like I'm in the United States southwestern desert of New Mexico.
Yeah.
Like when I came to New Mexico, because I talk to plants, I talk to everything. Like I felt like, oh my God, look at all these new friends. I don't even know what you are. I was giving name to cacti. Of course they have biological names, but as I was meeting them. So I still refer to them, the names that I got from them. But I felt so out of my element here for months because the plants, the landscape, everything was so different that I couldn't recognize. I could recognize wild sage. That was it. Like, that's it. I was feeling like really out of my element, but now I'm okay. So yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah, it's this like everlasting learning journey. And like you, I just don't get enough of learning. I hope to be learning literally until the day I die and even beyond. I mean, I look forward to these. I've heard there are massive libraries in the afterlife.
I'm going to be one of these women that come back.
After death, I'll be off into one of these libraries to learn all the things I couldn't learn while I was on Earth. Anyway.
Oh,
Just like
me, yeah, I love it.
Post-death goals. I already have plans for that. And my husband has already asked me, like, if we could sort of set a date in the afterlife, so we meet up again and start having adventures. So I've said to him, I will look into the technology of setting a date in the afterlife, because after all, it's outside time. And, intention is the largest part of it. It should be possible, right? So
I love it.
Yeah. Is there anything I have not asked? Do you have any kind of closing story or closing comment? Anything that you really feel you wanted to bring to this dialogue here on the Pregnant Hag?
The thing that I think in closing, want people to take away from this, because Kalavala is a big topic. I think we really covered it really nice for an introductory session today. But really in your own lives, look for relationship. So if you have a piece of knowledge, try to remember where you learned that. Did you learn it from a person or a book? And if it's from a book, who's the person that wrote that book? And create an energetic or imaginative connection to that person if they're no longer living. This is a great way to keep knowledge alive, is when we have these relationships to the knowledge we're learning. And it's a different way than thinking that we're isolated and in a bubble. That everything is really learned in community, whether you're aware of it or not, and to start looking expansively for where that community lies. You know? So that would be that's my wish, that people start looking for that community a little bit.
Looking for that connection. That's one of the most profound things. My own mother in the Netherlands, who's not much of a philosopher, but she has her moments. She once said to me, she said, "Imelda, look around." She said, everything that surrounds you, other than like nature and what's in the landscape, I'm more talking about the human items. She says, every single object around you started off as an idea in someone's head. that cup you are holding, the glass you're drinking from, that alarm clock you used to wake up in the morning, or, you know, even the paints you used to paint, someone would have experimented to arrive at the right proportion and the right hue, etc., etc. And she just said, Imelda, just like never forget, like always be aware of all these gifts from other people and the ancestors in every single thing around us. And today that goes for text structures as well, you know, like the people who gave us the internet, the people who gave us, you know, like airplanes and the ability for humans to fly and so forth. And the moment you get that way of thinking, it's like, wow, you're blown away. You get to occupy your space in that larger whole. And like you say, you no longer feel that, oh, it's just me here and I'm feeling quite isolated. You realize you're a little cog in a much, much larger creation.
Exactly. Yeah. So just expansive awareness and how we're connected, the relationships we have with everything.
Yeah, okay. So Valarie, my final question. Do you have a favorite word in Finnish? I mean, I can think of a few, but do you have a particularly beautiful word in Finnish?
I really like laula. I love that means song. Yeah. And it sounds like a song, right? Laula. Like it just sings. I love that. I also like terve. You know, to say hello or goodbye. And I love that. And so in Finnish, you can say hello and goodbye many ways, but moi is hello. And if you repeat it twice, moi, it's goodbye. Yeah. So I just, you know, it can be a very difficult language, but there's just something so endearing about it. And it has a gentleness to its sound. And I think, you know, we have to, as a language group, it's an Asian language group structure, and that's why it's that complex. And I think everybody thinks Finland's up there in Scandinavia. It is, but you know,
it's not part of Scandinavia. It's part of the Nordic countries. It's
Nordic countries, exactly.
This is like a misconception. Finland is not a Scandinavian country. Let's just be, you know, give people the right.
It's a Nordic country. It's a Nordic country, and really with very different traditions. And though Sweden governed Finland for so long, and everybody spoke Swedish, I think that's also fed that misnomer of Scandinavia. But it is just the most beautiful country, and I love the independence of the people. And no, it's a great place. I love Finnish a lot.
Great country. I think we'll try to say something in Finnish to you, and you can translate it. Siinä oletsi sukas nainen. Siinä oletsi sukas nainen.
Okay, no, you translate it. Tell me what you said.
You are a resourceful woman. You're a woman with sisu.
Oh, sisu, which means my inner strength, right? Yeah. I'm not hearing you well, so I am sorry for that.
Actually, I'm not pronouncing it perfectly. I thought that's how it's pronounced. Inspired. You see, I have a lot more learning to do.
No. We need a clearer Zoom.
Quality, the sound quality is not great this evening. This is a fact.
No, it's not. It's not.
Hope
no.
It's going to be good enough for people to still like hear 99% of it. But you know, my apologies. You know, I have a microphone here and everything, so I don't know what is going on here tonight. So anyway, thank you so much, Valarie. So this was episode number 3 on the Pregnant Hag podcast, and there'll be more interviews coming up. So stay tuned and check them out.
Thank you, Imelda, for having me. I've loved being here with you.
Yes, I enjoyed it too. It's always good talking to you. Goodbye.